marriage, and that was the first of the eight questions, or eight, was it Amir? 8 you had on the list? Yeah. Right, everyone seems to be so quiet and it still seems natural to me. Maybe it's because I'm so used to rowdy, naughty children, or even those that can't speak, because I have some children who are non-verbal, they scream at me. Yeah! So at least make some noise. Right, has anyone got any comments or questions about what we said so far? Please.
You say about perfection, but I think, and I have read about it, that human cannot be perfect. So if human cannot be perfect in his life, so how the marriage can be perfect? It can go near to the perfect, but as you said, it takes time, years. But I never see in my life, at least, that some pair is perfect. So we are.
Yeah, I think this absolute perfection is not possible. But the word perfection has degrees. There are degrees of perfection, and actually in Arabic we actually have the word al-ihsan, which means the process. Ihsan is a process of achieving or striving for perfection. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam kataba Allah al-ihsan ala kulli shay. Perfection has been written upon everything. So if you slaughter perfectly. What it means, the word ihsan, maybe shouldn't be translated literally as perfect. It should be degrees of perfection, or striving for perfection. So you're actually right, and that's a very good point. But in a marriage if we jump to the one thing that I didn't prepare for, which is divorce, you'll see that one of the things you'll see that sometimes things are not working. And I remember one of the wise teachers that I witnessed dealing with couples. I remember him talking once about what percentage of your relationship is good. What percentage of your relationship is good? And if they said 20%, then you could see on his face that he's talking about maybe this isn't working. But if they said 51%, then you could see on his face that he means there's something to strive for. And then the second question was, is it getting better or is it getting worse? And if it's 20% and getting better, then you could see his smile coming back, and you could see his demeanor changes, because there's hope in achieving perfection. And you're right, nobody ever gets to absolute perfection except the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But we can get degrees of striving for that perfection. So you can say, how close are you to perfection? And the best way to do that is to ask the spouse, how good is he? How good is she? Alhamdulillah, if your wife is pleased with you, usually, if she's a good wife, it would be she's pleased with you because the qualities that you show are the qualities of prophetic qualities. And that's what I like. And likewise, if the husband is pleased with the wife, it's because she has those qualities, which are those prophetic, divine qualities. And that's why you can measure the degrees of perfection related to the prophetic character. So that's a good point, a good question. Any other questions before I move on a little bit further about what is marriage? Because if you want to know what a thing is, really you need to know, what is it all about? What's it for? Is it just about producing children? Because that's what it sounded like when I said it the first time. Yeah? Because it ain't. There's more to it than that. So what is it? What is it about? And as I said, for some of the questions it's nice and easy for me because the scholars have written about it. And one of the great scholars that wrote about this topic is Imam al-Ghazali. And Imam al-Ghazali has an enormous set of books, 40 books in total, which is collectively put together. It's called Ihya Ulum ad-Din, the bringing to life of the sciences of this religion. And I'm sure most of you know this, but it might be worth just putting that book in some historic context. For for example, my wife, Sarah, she really doesn't like it. And sometimes she doesn't quite say that Ghazali is a sexist, no, so-and-so, but she almost says that. And the only reason she doesn't say that is because she knows she'll upset me. But I know in her face and her tone, what she says is, he's a sexist so-and-so. Yeah. You should meet Sarah, you'll like her. You think that's funny. So, you need to put it in historic context. Imam al-Ghazali was a great, great scholar. And he was a scholar that had loads and loads and loads of intellectual power. He was just a genius. When it came to knowledge of the outward rules, he was the best. When it came to debating, he was the best. When it came to anything to do with up here, he was the best in the world. And then one day, he just cracked. I think it was building up, but there was one day he was in a dars like this. Nothing would come out. He couldn't speak. He'd sit to address people and not a word would come out. He went away, maybe he's ill, maybe he needs to take a rest. Comes back the next day and he tries again. And he can't do it. If you actually read the description from a psychiatric or medical perspective, you say, oh, he's having a nervous breakdown. Of course, I wouldn't say he was having a nervous breakdown, but that's the description. It was a real crisis he was going through. So what did he do? He just stopped teaching. And he disappeared. He just went away for 20 years. And at one point, he was cleaning the mosque in a city called Khalil, Hebron. So he travelled from Baghdad and all the Iraq, and he was in the mosque, just cleaning the mosque, pretending to, well, just being a cleaner. And nobody knows this is the great Imam al-Ghazali. And the teacher is teaching one of the books of Imam al-Ghazali. And Imam al-Ghazali said, and Imam al-Ghazali said, and he got it all wrong. And the cleaner, who is Imam al-Ghazali, had to think, now what do I do? Do I go up and correct him? So he goes up and he says, well, actually, that meant this and that and the other. He says, who do you think you are, Imam al-Ghazali? So what does he do? Yeah, actually, I am. Because then they would have locked him up. Yeah, now he's not only had a nervous breakdown, he's got real psychiatric disorder of probably schizophrenia here. He thinks he's Imam al-Ghazali. Of course, he is Imam al-Ghazali. So he goes through this process for 20 years where he just hides and he just runs away from that world of knowledge and of scholarship. And he just, after a while he comes back and he says, all of that stuff that I did was no good. What I need to do now is I need to bring those sciences to life so that they're real. They're not just up here, but they're from here. So he wrote the book, Ihya Ulumuddin, the bringing to life of the sciences of the deen. And as I said, it's 40 books, one of which is here, called Kitab Adab al-Nikah. Now the problem is, this is many, many years ago, and some of the language that he uses, when it's translated into Danish, or even worse, into Urdu, my wife speaks Danish, Urdu and English, they lead Sarah to think he's a sexist so-and-so. Why? Because the words have been translated, the meanings haven't. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm going to use his words, and sorry for the long introduction to what I'm saying, but I need to justify what I'm saying. So I'll use his words, and then I will explain how I understand them, and you're free to reject it. Anything that I say, I'd like to discuss. Because sometimes I think the translation of the words have been slightly misunderstood. Okay, so I'm sorry for the long introduction. He said the purpose of marriage is 5. Okay? The translation said the benefits of marriage are 5. But I would like to translate it as the purposes. And the reason why I'm saying those things is because if you understand what he's saying in these 5 things, you'll know what marriage is. And if you want to make notes, I think it would be useful, because the next question is, I mean, it was the second question, how do you choose a wife? Or how do you choose a spouse? So if you know what you're getting married for, then you know how to choose, don't you? Okay? And of course it's too late for you, because you've already chosen and you made a good choice. And that's actually the last time I wore a turban, by the way, was at his wedding. No, actually I think he did after, so only once after that. Okay. Right, so the 5 things. I'll say it in Arabic, for those who know Arabic, and those who don't know Arabic, then at least you can say, well, he's got the words Imam al-Ghazali actually used, not translated to Urdu or English. He said, al-awwal al-walad. And if you don't speak Arabic, don't write them down. الثاني كسر الشهوة تدبير المنزل. 4th كثرة العشيرة. And 5th مجاهدة النفس بالقيام بهن. Right, that's the Arabic, let me explain them in English. The first one is to have children. And actually the purpose of marriage, the first purpose of marriage, is to produce children. And it's in the context that I've just talked about, that this is a divine act. It's a divine act by which Allah perpetuates the creation. And then it goes on to talk, and this is where Sarah would have said, well, this is why he's so sexist, because it seems that he's against old women in particular. Because once a woman gets to a certain age, it implies that she shouldn't be able to get married anymore. Because if the purpose of marriage is to have children, and that's of course not what Imam al-Ghazali really meant. What he meant, and it's based on the hadith where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, marry beautiful, fertile women. But if you translate that literally, a feminist like my wife will say, oh, that's a sexist hadith. You get where she's coming from? But she's not. It's not a sexist hadith. It's actually talking about the first point, which is marriage is actually about producing children. And that's why there is no such thing as a gay nikah. You can't have a gay nikah. It's just an oxymoron. It can't have that. You can have perhaps a gay partnership, but you can't have the word nikah doesn't apply to that. Okay, the first one, and I think that's pretty straightforward. And if people want me to go over further about discussion about that, we can. But I actually think it's a bit boring.
No.
So I'm going to skip that bit. We come back to it because these guys want to talk about having children.
We have more than enough children,
Okay, so you don't mind me.
I would like to talk about wives,
You want to talk about wives?
Yeah,
okay, that might lead us on to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th.
But not wives.
Wives, you want to talk about polygamy? I had a feeling I was going to go down that road. Where was I when they said, beware, whatever the topic is, they will talk about polygamy. I was actually warned that I was giving a program, and they say, no matter what your topic is, those guys are going to talk about polygamy. Wallahi, it happened. So if you need to, we'll come to that in a while. Let's listen to the second one. Kasrat al-shahwa. It breaks the shahwa. Shahwa, desire is what it's usually translated as. But here, shahwa is, I would have translated it different to breaking of desire. I would have translated it as the redirection of desire, so that you no longer have desire which distracts you from what your purpose is. That's how I would have translated it. Why? Because breaking of desire sounds like desire is a really ugly thing, and you just got to beat it, you want to beat it. That's what Sufis do. We go off and we stand in the snow with our hands like this, and we go, boom, until we get fana, and then we know who God is, and then we don't love women anymore. Because that's not what shahwa is. Shahwa isn't about spiritual exercises. Kasrat al-shahwa isn't about that. It's about redirecting your passion so that you can now focus on something which is... let me just explain that, why I would translate it in that way. Does anybody know who Abdullah ibn Umar is? Yep, you're right. Abdullah ibn Umar is one of the great companions. He's the son of Umar ibn Khattab. Now when Abdullah ibn Umar, he used to do the perpetual fast. He used to fast every day except 4 days a year, which are the days of Eid. So he fasted 56 days of the year. And every time that he broke his fast, he didn't break his fast with dates and water like most of us do. He came home, he had intercourse with his wife, he had a shower, then he had his dates and water, prayed his Maghrib, and then he carried on with his prayer. Every single night, that's how he broke his fast, by having intimacy with his wife. He was one of the greatest companions. And what we learn from that is kasrat shahwa isn't just about passion and desire. It's about redirecting of that passion and desire so that you become free to worship your Lord. And that's what kasrat shahwa means in this context of what Imam al-Ghazali says, is that being happily married means that you have no interest in outside. I touched on something yesterday, if anybody was there, and I didn't mean to, but I mentioned, somebody asked me a question about what are some of the issues, and I mentioned pornography. And I said that for a very deliberate reason, is that I know a lot of people who are tormented by pornography. And pornography is so common that it really is wrecking people's lives, it's wrecking people's mental health, and it's wrecking people's marriages. And I know through the kind of marriage counselling that I end up doing, one of the challenges is actually pornography, is that it determines what people expect from a relationship. Where a man, usually men, where